So it's actually quite shocking when you realize that our education system, and I believe that's true for most countries, was not designed in the way for learning, for education, in the way we think of it today. Let me explain. So during the Industrial Revolution, governments and industry leaders needed a population that was easy to manage, that was also compliant, and that was orderly. And so they looked over to Europe and they borrowed from the Prussian school system, and they invested heavily into essentially training kids to fit in a certain mold. And I'm really not making that up. You can research that. Why? Because economics and the ways people essentially earned a living changed so dramatically, so fast during that time. History repeats itself, doesn't it? So before that, we had hundreds of thousands of years essentially of people that in any shape or form, and for any type, any kind of size, owned businesses. They had trades, they were farmers, etc. So essentially they were their own bosses. And those people now, during the Industrial Revolution, were forced to essentially work in those factories now. So the complete way of how people made income changed dramatically for the majority of people. So before that, think about it, there was, for example, a man, and he had control over his entire day, his schedule, his routines, etc. He was getting the job done, but he had control. And now he was essentially forced into those factories to just keep history very simple, okay? You can go look it up yourself a bit more. But so essentially, then he was forced into the factories where essentially you had to, clock in, you had to clock out. You had to ask if you could use the bathroom. You were told when you could take your lunch, for how long your lunch was, etc., etc., etc. So essentially, from someone that is self-managed, self-driven, you had to ask for permission for everything, and your entire day was controlled by this institution. And of course that broke many men during that time, and it was what? So what is the best way to go about doing that, to not have essentially revolts and all kinds of other stuff started? I mean, obviously there were some of them, but still had to start early to change the way people thought about that kind of life. So they needed to raise a new generation that would essentially fit what the country and the industrialists needed to fit their economy. Yeah, rows of desks looks familiar. Hands raised if you want to ask for permission or if you need permission for anything. Strict bells, lunch breaks, obedience over curiosity, and uniformity over individuality. And now this video is not making a point. We can argue also the drawbacks of individualism, of course. But that's not the point of the video. I can make another video on that. But essentially, all of this, everything that I just shared with you were not educational decisions. They were behavioral ones. The focus, in my opinion, in school, it's not education. We've seen plenty of teachers record videos on that. And if you go down the TikTok rabbit hole of teachers and how they're saying the education system is effed. So that's essentially also what we're talking about. The whole point here is behavior. Managing, controlling behavior. Making it sound that this is the normal. And you know what the wild part is, in my opinion? We have barely changed anything. Or we haven't changed anything yet. So we're still running a system that is built to prepare children for factory floors, for corporations, and not for modern life or what we're about to face. And if your kid is neurodivergent too, or you have one of them, I'm not even gonna get started on neurodivergent minds. Okay, most schools still do not learn or teach about financial literacy. And if they say they do, what they are teaching is barely scratching the surface and is barely helping you in your adult life. They do not teach about taxes. They do not teach tax codes. No country actually is doing that. And essentially, which is most important, right, to understand tax codes, because this is where, as an adult, a majority chunk of your money is going if you are just essentially following it or following the norm, or what you're being told, or the information that is chosen, the information that is given to you, and the information that is withheld from you, right? Because you're not asking the right questions, that's hurting you in your adult life later on. Schools don't teach you how to make critical thinking decisions. Probably the majority of schools out there in the world, because when we are looking at tests and test scores, typically there's just like one right answer, or it's up to interpretation of what is the best answer by teachers. And like I said, I feel like obviously, like in every profession, there is better teachers and worse teachers, but most of the ones that I've known, funnily enough, they are choosing to homeschool. There is like one of the parents that we've met right now, majority has been a teacher, one of the parents, and they're doing that for various reasons based on also what they've seen in the school system over the years. Anyway, I'm not at all arguing here that education is wrong by any means, but are we really doing it in the best way possible, especially when thinking about how the future will look like pretty soon for our kids? Are governments around the world and private educational institutions incentivized to even want to change the system? Can we not do more? Or is this truly the best we can do as a society? So anyways, obviously, as someone that made the choice recently also to homeschool, I want to raise these questions because we felt like we had to make the hard choice to homeschool. It's a privilege. It's also a hard choice. And I wish that schools and education institutions and systems would be different. So hence I'm raising this topic because I think it's very interesting. So leave your comment what you're thinking. If you're still here, if you're watching the whole video, I appreciate it. And this post was essentially inspired by Connor M. Green, a psychosocial educator, a teacher, and also an author. And it kind of mirrored exactly, almost word for word, what my husband and I have been thinking, what we've discussed with a few of other homeschooling friends just today. And so I felt inspired to share that. I added some of my bits and pieces, but essentially the history from what we know is exactly that's how it went down. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. And if you want to stay on homeschooling TikTok, follow.